I appreciate all of you making the venture out, and I welcome all the people who are watching live and the people that will watch the presentation that we may post on our website as well. This is a talk that I gave about a year ago, and I've made a few changes, but as Chris said, it's pretty relevant, and we know that to change habits, it takes a lot of practice, and hearing that information again never really can hurt. So here we go again. So the title of the talk is HALT, and the gist is really to think about what you're hungry for and why. Those are the questions you really need to ask yourselves as you go through each day. From the moment you wake up, you have to be in tune with your needs. Physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, because that's the key to maintaining a life in balance, a combination of self-care and self-awareness, and it's not always easy to do. So HALT is an acronym that stands for asking yourself the question, are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? So the H is for hunger, and that can be a physical or an emotional need. All right, so understanding need to eat is fairly straightforward, right? You meet your nutritional needs, and that allows your body to operate at the highest potential and keeps you to feel better. But sometimes we have to halt and assess the situation and understand that the hunger is more than a physical need. Are you hungry for affection, attention, accomplishment, or really what is it that you're feeling? So you have to not turn to destructive habits or negative people to try to fill that void. A for anger, that's a normal and healthy emotion to experience. And the important thing is to stop and to understand what's causing your anger. Know how to properly express it. Perhaps you're angry with a situation, a person, maybe you're even angry at yourself. So it might be one little thing that spins out of control, or it's an ongoing event that's making you angry. And you have to assess it and figure out what to do about it. You may not be able to confront the person, but you may need to talk to somebody else about what's happening. But other ways to deal with your anger could be to exercise, sing, paint, other creative projects, cleaning. Cleaning is a really good one that helps a lot of people to deal with that excess energy that anger seems to provide. So make sure that you acknowledge it, that's the key, and reflect upon its causes, and then release it in a constructive rather than a destructive way. Loneliness can occur when we're by ourselves or when we're surrounded by many people. We tend to isolate ourselves because we don't feel like other people can understand us. But running low, when we're feeling lonely, it's important to halt and to reach out to someone. And your support system is there for you. Sometimes you may need to call a friend, visit a loved one. Sometimes you just need to go out into the world, go to a coffee shop, go to a mall, be with people just so you're not alone and you don't turn to the addictive and destructive behaviors. And then tiredness, that definitely takes a toll on our bodies, our mind, and our spirit. Our days are often filled with errands, meetings, activities, and it's easy to ignore how tired we've really become. But when we run low on energy, it really compromises our ability to think and to make good decisions and our capacity to cope. So taking the time to halt is particularly important when you're tired. You may need to actually satisfy that physical need to sleep or take a nap. You may just need to take a break in your day and take a walk or listen to music. So recharging your body, mind, and spirit helps you to get through the tough moments without relying on the comfort of food. HALT can serve as a reminder to all of us that we need to take care of our basic needs every day. Need to pay close attention to your feelings. So I use this HALT acronym with patients just to help them pause. And it may not be these emotions that you're dealing with. We know there's a lot more emotions than that. So you really have to be in tune with what you're feeling. The function of emotions is to tell us about our internal world, right? They're messages. And just as our senses provide us guidance to the external world, our emotions tell us about our internal world. But emotions scare us, they puzzle us, they confuse us, they drive us to eat, shop, drink, starve, gamble, work, exercise, talk nonstop, live dangerously, take drugs, all in order not to feel them. Imagine if you did that to your senses, right? Scary, silly. The purpose of emotions is exactly the same as your senses, to keep you safe and out of harm's way, to steer you towards what's healthy and life-affirming, and deter you from what's dangerous and life-threatening. They're like a built-in radar system, and it helps you to interact effectively with the world. Emotions actually originate from the same place in the brain as the senses do. So emotions like happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment tell you that your needs are being properly satisfied, and negative emotions such as fear, anger, boredom, resentment, frustration, they tell you that your needs may not be being met. So negative emotions are there to prompt change, paying attention to them and trying to assess what's going on and what you need to change. Sometimes we're not equipped to deal with those negative emotions. We fear them, judge them. We only think we should feel the good, and we don't appreciate the message that the negative emotions might be transmitting. So there's a high correlation between trying to run from pain and disordered eating. So the triggers, identifying the external and internal triggers are what's important, and learning how to deal with them. Emotions are kind of like firecrackers. You're in no danger as long as they don't get triggered. But once they're triggered, then there could be an explosion, and you try to run from that distress. So really what the main portion of this talk is about breaking habits. And we know that turning to food for a lot of us has become a habit. And we really can understand how it might have first began when we were an infant and were nurtured with food. You can think about the infant being nurtured and fed and being held close to someone, and that represents safety, security, closeness, pleasure, comfort. Also, milk contains tryptophan, which the infant receives, and it produces the relaxing response. So we're biologically programmed to focus on food when under stress. So you can be mindful of those early influences that life has on your food decision and learn better ways to soothe yourself. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice. It takes practice to get to the place where cookies and pasta don't have power over you, and you learn to self-soothe without food. So this is called the comfort eating carousel. And again, it just kind of helps to explain how these habits form. So the carousel will go round and round. We experience a distress. Something happens, some kind of trigger. We have a need for comfort to run from that distress. So then we eat something. We feel a temporary sense of relief. Positive feelings don't last very long, so they evaporate. Then we feel guilty because we ate something. That's a negative emotion that you try to run from. So you're experiencing distress from guilt, and it goes round and round. All right. So you can get off of that carousel, but it's tempting to just have one more ride because there is a reward. There's that temporary comfort, and you might not really have been taught self-soothing skills. That's part of the issue. You might not have been taught how to deal with stress. Maybe you didn't have good examples. Maybe you tried to pick it up by watching other people. And in the absence of healthy coping skills, self-soothing skills, you turn to food because it's cheap, legal, and readily accessible, right? Why food is so comforting? Number of reasons. These have all been hypotheses. The feel-good fix is one. Eating doesn't just feel good because of the sensory pleasure to your tongues. There's actually chemicals at work. So food changes your neurochemistry. Good food, for example, stimulates dopamine, and that's a neurotransmitter that regulates pleasure. So when researchers test the brain responses of people who are overweight, they actually find that the pleasure center of the brain lights up more intensely than others in people that are overweight. So for some people, food gives them an extreme amount of pleasure. And eating has also been linked to the changes in the serotonin level, which is boosted by taking antidepressants. Stress is another reason, and it's an effort to rebalance. Again, this is kind of a chemical explanation. There is something called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands, and they're triggered when you feel overwhelmed. Your body becomes flooded with cortisol. You may have heard of that as the stress hormone. That hormone actually makes you crave sugary, fatty, calorie-dense foods. It all began with cavemen who needed all the energy they could muster to fight off threat. And so the cavemen, the cortisol would be released, and it actually increases their body mass and their ability to fight the predators. So the third thing is it prolongs pleasure. Eating prolongs the positive feelings and sometimes elevates them. If you're happy, sometimes food makes you feel even happier for a longer period of time. And there's even some studies that show on certain foods can activate that more than others. Pizza, steak, popcorn, those are some of the favorites to help prolong that happy feeling. And accessibility, we already talked some about, right? Cheap foods and comfort foods are everywhere, hard to escape them. Convenience makes it easy to turn to calm and soothe yourself. And it's kind of interesting that there's a gender and a culture difference. For females, the comfort foods are chocolate, more like chocolate and ice cream. And for men, it's warm and hearty meals like steak. So media is another reason that we turn to food. We can think about the association of certain foods with words like chocolate tied to bliss, relaxing, you deserve it, escape. So people begin to expect those emotions when they eat that food. Boredom, really common. I think we all do this a bit. It fills a block of time. Eating fills a block of time. So we have to learn what to do when we're bored and really how to tolerate boredom, but to plan for what you're going to do when you're bored. And boredom usually means you're not challenged. You need to find something that's more challenging and ways to grow. And habit, which we're really focusing on a lot today. A significant portion of emotional eating is nothing more than habit. You do it like brushing your teeth or combing your hair. It's just part of your routine. Distraction. One theory states that eating distracts us from emotions. You're focusing your mind in a different direction by eating instead of dealing with the negative emotion, how upset, angry, tearful, hurt, fearful you are. Ignoring your internal cues when stressed, sometimes people become insensitive to their inner cues of hunger and fullness. And so you might confuse emotional arousal as hunger. So if you're not really tuned into your internal cues, you're more vulnerable to eating when you're stressed because you have this sensation and you just assume it means you're hungry. Alexithymia, it's long term. That just means some people actually have difficulty putting their feeling into words. They can't really express themselves. And finally, impulsivity. You simply don't stop to consider your decisions fully. You impulsively grab something to put in your mouth without thinking about it. So while it may be helpful to kind of know the origins of where your connection with emotional eating came from, it's not necessarily imperative to changing habits. So that's really where we're going to focus on next. All right, so habit is like a well-worn path, right? It's easy to go down that path. It takes very little effort. But sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. It takes a lot more energy to forge a new path. So the steps of change. Katie talked a little bit about this. So some of this is a little bit of review from resolution talk last support group. There are 5 steps of change, breaking habits. The first is pre-contemplation. That's when you're kind of not really acknowledging that you have a problem. You're kind of in denial. And the second step, contemplation, well, you're thinking about it, open to learning about it, even accepting that there might be a problem. Preparation is getting ready to engage in change. So this is where the SMART technique that Katie talked about comes into play, setting some goals. But as she mentions, it's not just setting goals, but how you set the goals. It's really critical. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So when I'm working with you, that's a lot of what we're doing when we're working on goal setting. We're setting SMART goals. And then action, so you can't just set the goals, you've got to act on it, right? Seeking help towards action and replacing the old habits. And this is where it's helpful to have somebody that you're touching base with and kind of being accountable to. Whether it's in a support group, talking with a psychologist, or friends, family members. And maintenance is keeping the improvements going. So it's certainly not all about willpower. The more you understand about habit, the less importance you assign to willpower. As much as 45% of your daily activity is habit, and that comes from The Power of Habit, author Charles Duhigg. So that means that if you don't deliberately create your habits so that they line up with your goals, you're going to experience a lot of frustration. And we know this is the time of year people sometimes set resolutions what I saw was there's about a 81 to 92% failure rate for resolutions. I think, Katie, did you say about that 95%? I think I remember you talking about. It's a really high, right?
It was 85.
85? Okay. So they're not great odds.
Right.
Not great odds. So the reason that we fail at changing habits is that we don't really understand the mechanics of change, like this. We try to rely on willpower. So the key really to changing your habit is to replace them, not just to make the goal, but to replace the behavior that you're trying to change with something else that's more positive and productive. So this is the habit loop. It's a reward loop. And it starts out with a cue, a trigger that tells your brain to go into the automatic mode. Then you have a routine, which is a physical, mental, or emotional behavior that follows the cue. And then there's a reward, the positive stimulus, the positive reinforcement that tells your brain, yeah, that worked, that was good, keep going. So after a few repetitions of this, your brain stops fully participating. It really doesn't have to think anymore. It's saving energy. It's called chunking. It saves energy for other things that you need to do. So that's how the habit forms. So you can see that something has to change in there to break the habit. So habits are tied to triggers. There's the cue. The habit trigger bond is strengthened through repetition. So habits, the cues fall into 5 categories. A certain time of day is often a cue, a certain place, the presence of certain people, a particular feeling, an emotion, or a preceding behavior that's been ritualized. So you probably don't have to pay attention to exactly what you're doing or feeling before you overeat, drink, smoke. So some cues might be stress and anxiety, some of those emotion cues, and then your brain goes into that chunking, automatic, I don't have to think about it mode. So what's important is to try to identify your triggers. You have to really assess them and write them down. And that process can really help you learn what motivates you, where your urges come from, how you rationalize them. And then you have to pinpoint the routine. That's the unwanted behavior, like reaching for a snack, reaching for a cigarette. If you're trying to break Facebook, getting on your phone, looking at Facebook. And then the reward. So describing the feeling that you're trying to seek from the behavior. They can be physical sensations or emotional payoffs. The reward could be a feeling of calm, happiness, numbing, catharsis, release, fullness. So habits can really only be overcome if we put a new routine into this habit loop. Craving is what drives the whole habit loop. Only when our brains expect a reward will a habit stick. So as we anticipate the reward, that's when the subconscious craving emerges. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. So the next thing we're going to try to do is play a TED Talk. And it's by a psychiatrist named Judson Brewer. And his talk is Simple Way to Break a Bad Habit. And the gist of it is research that he's done on breaking habits. He has a book called The Craving Mind, From Cigarettes to Smartphones to Love, Why We Get Hooked and How We Can Break Bad Habits. And he researches how mindfulness techniques help quell cravings of all kinds. So, let's see if I can do this. Not yet.
Sounded simple. Sweating through t-shirts in the middle of winter. I take naps every chance I got because it was really hard work. Actually, it was exhausting. The instruction was simple enough, but I was missing something really important. So why is it so hard to pay attention? Well, studies show that even when we're really trying to pay attention to something, like maybe this talk, at some point about half of us will drift off into a daydream or have this urge to check our Twitter feed. So what's going on here? It turns out that we're fighting one of the most evolutionarily conserved learning processes currently known in science, one that's conserved back to the most basic nervous systems known to man. This reward-based learning process is called positive and negative reinforcement, and basically goes like this. We see some food that looks good, our brain says, calories, survival. We eat the food, we taste it, it tastes good, and especially with sugar, our bodies send a signal to our brain that says, remember what you're eating and where you found it. We lay down this context-dependent memory and learn to repeat the process next time. See food, eat food, feel good, repeat. Trigger, behavior, reward. Simple, right? Well, after a while, our creative brains say, you know what? You can use this for more than just remembering where food is. You know, next time you feel bad, why don't you try eating something good so you'll feel better? We thank our brains for the great idea, try this, and quickly learn that if we eat chocolate or ice cream when we're mad or sad, we feel better. Same process, just a different trigger. Instead of this hunger signal coming from our stomach, this emotional signal, feeling sad, triggers that urge to eat. Maybe in our teenage years, we were a nerd at school, and we see those rebel kids outside smoking, we think, hey, I want to be cool, so we start smoking. The Marlboro Man wasn't a dork, and that was no accident. See cool, smoke to be cool, feel good. Repeat, trigger, behavior, reward. And each time we do this, we learn to repeat the process, and it becomes a habit. So later, feeling stressed out triggers that urge to smoke a cigarette or to eat something sweet. Now with these same brain processes, we've gone from learning to survive to literally killing ourselves with these habits. Obesity and smoking are among the leading preventable causes of morbidity and mortality in the world. So back to my breath. What if instead of fighting our brains or trying to force ourselves to pay attention, we instead tapped into this natural reward-based learning process, but added a twist? What if instead we just got really curious about what was happening in our momentary experience? I'll give you an example. In my lab, we studied whether mindfulness training could help people quit smoking. Now, just like trying to force myself to pay attention to my breath, they could try to force themselves to quit smoking. And the majority of them had tried this before and failed, on average 6 times. Now, with mindfulness training, we dropped the bit about forcing and instead focused on being curious. In fact, we even told them to smoke. What? Yeah, we said, go ahead and smoke. Just be really curious about what it's like when you do. And what did they notice? Well, here's an example from one of our smokers. She said, mindful smoking smells like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. Yuck. Now, she knew cognitively that smoking was bad for her. That's why she joined our program. What she discovered just by being curiously aware when she smoked was that smoking tastes like shit. Now, she moved from knowledge to wisdom. She moved from knowing in her head that smoking was bad for her to knowing it in her bones. And the spell of smoking was broken. She she started to become disenchanted with her behavior. Now, the prefrontal cortex, that youngest part of our brain from an evolutionary perspective, it understands on an intellectual level that we shouldn't smoke. And it tries its hardest to help us change our behavior, to help us stop smoking, to help us stop eating that second, that third, that fourth cookie. We call this cognitive control. We're using cognition to control our behavior. Unfortunately, this is also the first part of our brain that goes offline when we get stressed out, which isn't that helpful. Now, we can all relate to this in our own experience. We're much more likely to do things like yell at our spouse or kids when we're stressed out or tired, even though we know it's not going to be helpful. We just can't help ourselves. Now, when the prefrontal cortex goes offline, we fall back into our old habits, which is why this disenchantment is so important. Seeing what we get from our habits helps us understand them in a deeper level, to know it in our own bones, so we don't have to force ourselves to hold back or restrain ourselves from behavior. We're just less interested in doing it in the first place. And this is what mindfulness is all about. Seeing really clearly what we get when we get caught up in our behaviors, becoming disenchanted on a visceral level, and from this disenchanted stance, naturally letting go. This isn't to say that, poof, magically we quit smoking, but over time, as we learn to see more and more clearly the results of our actions, we let go of old habits and form new ones. The paradox here is that mindfulness is just about being really interested in getting close and personal with what's actually happening in our bodies and minds from moment to moment. This willingness to turn toward our experience rather than trying to make unpleasant cravings go away as quickly as possible. And this willingness to turn toward our experience is supported by curiosity, which is naturally rewarding. What does curiosity feel like? It feels good. And what happens when we get curious? We start to notice that cravings are simply made up of body sensations. Oh, there's tightness, there's tension, there's restlessness, and that these body sensations come and go. These are bite-sized pieces of experiences that we can manage from moment to moment, rather than getting clobbered by this huge, scary craving that we choke on. In other words, when we get curious, we step out of our old fear-based reactive habit patterns and we step into being. We become this inner scientist where we're eagerly awaiting that next data point. Now, this might sound too simplistic to affect behavior, but in one study we found that mindfulness training was twice as good as gold standard therapy at helping people quit smoking. So it actually works. And when we studied the brains of experienced meditators, we found that parts of a neural network of self-referential processing called the default mode network were at play. Now, one current hypothesis is that a region of this network called the posterior cingulate cortex is activated not necessarily by craving itself, but when we get caught up in it, when we get sucked in and it takes us for a ride. In contrast, when we let go, step out of the process just by being curiously aware of what's happening, this same brain region quiets down. Now we're testing app and online-based mindfulness training programs that target these core mechanisms. And ironically, use the same technology that's driving us to distraction to help us step out of our unhealthy habit patterns of smoking, of stress eating, and other addictive behaviors. Now remember that bit about context-dependent memory? We can deliver these tools to people's fingertips in the contexts that matter most. So we can help them tap into their inherent capacity to be curiously aware right when that urge to smoke or stress eat or whatever arises. So if you don't smoke or stress eat, maybe the next time you feel this urge to check your email when you're bored or you're trying to distract yourself from work, or maybe to compulsively respond to that text message when you're driving, see if you can tap into this natural capacity. Just be curiously aware of what's happening in your body and mind in that moment. It will just be another chance to perpetuate one of our endless and exhaustive habit loops, or step out of it. Instead of see text message, compulsively text back, feel a little bit better, notice the urge, get curious, feel the joy of letting go, and repeat. Thank you.
that just was kind of a really nice synopsis of what we've been talking about as far as habit goes and research backing it. And even though his research is based on cigarettes, it applies to any habit. That's going to be the next thing that we're going to talk about, just specifics about how to do what he was talking about. And so this is another acronym, just like HALT. It's SIT, to remind you to learn to self-soothe without food and work on breaking that habit. So sitting is training your mind to stop, to sit. Just like you train a new puppy, you don't get angry when the puppy is going away from you. You're forgiving and you bring it back. Same thing when you're learning to slow your mind down. Being in tune with your current state of mind helps you to make the next food decision mindfully and steer clear of emotional eating. So you ask your mind to sit for a moment, not run from place to place, and be curious, as Dr. Brewer said, what you're feeling right now. You pause your mind in the moment. How does your body feel? Are you emotionally or physically hungry? And next, you inspect. You notice your thoughts. What are your thoughts? You do so non-judgmentally. You just observe them in a neutral way, kind of telling yourself, oh, I'm thinking that. And then you take a deep breath. So you recenter with a refreshing burst of oxygen to the brain, telling yourself that you're here in the moment. I like to use a visualization when helping people to take deep breaths of a squeegee, kind of starting at the top of your head and envisioning how you squeegee down, letting all the stress out from the tip of your head to your toes. You visualize the stress going out. So what's important to remember about emotions is that they really only last about 90 seconds. According to a neuroanatomist, Dr. Taylor's research, it takes less than 90 seconds for an emotion to get triggered, surge chemically through the bloodstream, and then get flushed out. So the first thing to do with an emotion is just to notice it, not try to push it away. Simply experiencing what's happening without judgment about it. Strong emotions can easily dysregulate us. They knock us off course. And rather than just observing them, we feel this need to regulate ourselves immediately. But if we just give ourselves a little time, our bodies and minds often move toward regulation on their own. Instead, we might rush for a snack so that it can perform its magic act in that reward loop. So how to be more aware? The negative self-talk, the inspection that we talked about in the SIT acronym. Vincent van Gogh said, if you hear a voice within you say, you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. So you have to listen to your self-talk and consider whether it falls into 3 categories. Self-evaluation, I did it wrong. Motivational, like you go girl. Instructional, like you need to try that more and more. And many emotional eaters are stuck in the evaluation category, and they miss the benefits of motivation and instructional self-talk. So be mindful of your self-talk. Some techniques to do that would be to name that critical voice and kind of distance yourself from it. Oh, there goes that Miss Perfect voice again, always wanting me to do things a certain way. So it's kind of not acknowledging that it's you, but it's something that's happening to you. Try to determine where the voice is coming from. What's the trigger? Was that from a critical coach, teacher, parent, boss? Asking yourself if it's true. Is that a fact? Because our thoughts are not often facts, right? They're opinions, but we treat them like facts. You might ask yourself, would a best friend agree with that? You can step back from the thoughts and just observe. I'm having the thought that, and that sounds way different than I am lazy. I'm having the thought that I'm lazy right now. That lessens the intensity of that inner critic and reminds us that a thought is really just a thought. And you can change the thought to something positive. I often, again, work with an analogy of a remote control, and you are in charge of that remote control in your brain. You choose which channel it's on, and you can stay stuck on that negative channel, or you can push to one that's more positive. You're in charge. So another way to be more aware is mindful eating. No one means to mindlessly eat. It's just a symptom of being disconnected from your body. So the benefits of mindful eating are numerous. One study found that those who ate mindfully were able to shift their eating behaviors, alter their weight, and reduce distress. Another study found that in addition to that, mindful eating can reduce one's glycemic index, and that's the effect of food on your blood sugar. For binge eaters, mindfulness has been shown to reduce the frequency of binging episodes and reduce anxiety. So how do you eat mindfully? You have to turn off the TV, put down the phone, turn off your Kindle, and just be. Sit down, bring the food up to you. You have to have your head up and not slumped over, shoveling. Slowly chew, which also aids in digestion. Pause between bites and try to carry on conversation. And use your senses to be more mindful, like looking at your food, noticing the colors and how it's presented on the plate and the smell, and actually savoring, appreciating the taste, the smell, the texture, not rushing and letting yourself enjoy the 20-minute exercise that helps you recognize when you're full. It helps you better recognize your satiety level when you're being mindful and taking time to eat. The slower you eat, the greater the odds you'll notice you're full before you've eaten too much. And it also means that you've paid attention to the full range of sensations that are available in each bite and you're really enjoying. Also, smiling helps you to take a pause between bites. You can think about whether you're satisfied. Distraction is another way to help you avoid that habit loop and have a plan for when you encounter the trigger. So you're working on breaking the association with food and curbing the craving. Dr. Albers is the author of a book, 50 Ways to Soothe Yourself Without Food, and another book, 50 More Ways to Soothe Yourself Without Food. And so she advocates a method called the 5-5-5-5-5 exercise. So the 5 ways are: think about 5 people to call. You write these down, right? You have a plan. 5 people to call. 5 ways to relax, like taking a hot bath, shower, rolling out on an exercise ball, leaning back in the recliner, etc. 5 places to go to calm down: outside, in your bedroom, in the library. 5 things you can say to yourself: this will pass. I've done harder things. You've got this. And 5 activities to distract yourself, like doing a puzzle, playing a game on your phone, reading a book, running an errand, planning your next vacation, journaling. So it's not supposed to work like food. That takes a long time to change, but you're just trying to break that habit loop. So these are the steps that help you to ignite that change process and help to avoid continuing to step on that habit loop carousel. A while back, Megan blogged about hobbies that don't involve food. So that might be something to look up if you're needing some ideas about things that you can do to distract yourself when you're bored other than with food. So I'm going to end with this. These are just some of the resources that I used. Thank you.
Could you go back to the very first slide that had HALT, all spelled out, if possible? Yeah. To go all through it.